Dr. Eliza Chen didn't flinch when the Galactic Council security scanner pierced her skin. The alien guards gasped, their various armored appendages recoiling in horror as a drop of her blood spattered on the pristine floor of the council anteroom. "It bleeds from a simple identification scan," hissed the Vextar security chief, mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. "How has this creature survived space travel?" Eliza dabbed the pinprick with a tissue, smiling thinly. "I've survived worse than your scanners, Chief. Much worse." Hours later, standing before the full council assembly, Eliza watched 23 pairs of alien eyes, or sensory organs approximating eyes, examine her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. The magnificent chamber, with its soaring crystalline dome revealing the starscape beyond, amplified her feeling of vulnerability. The only unarmored being in a gathering of living tanks. "You mean to tell us," rumbled Admiral Kazoth of the Jiraxian hegemony, his massive armored form bristling with natural weapon nodules as he towered over her, "that your species evolved without proper exoskeletons, carapaces, or even basic dermal plating? That all humans are as—" He seemed to search for a diplomatic word. "Exposed as you." The council representatives shifted uncomfortably. Some had evolved thick scales that refracted light into hypnotic patterns, others metallic skin that hummed with bioelectric current, and still others force-projecting organs that shimmered with protective fields. A few whispered in languages her translator couldn't catch, clearly betting on how long humanity would survive in the interstellar community. Eliza glanced down at the slideshow presentation she prepared. Complex diagrams of human biology, historical accounts of human endurance, and closed her tablet with a decisive snap. Theory wouldn't convince them. She needed something more dramatic. "Admiral," she said, stepping forward with a calmness that silenced the chamber, "with your permission, I'd like to demonstrate what makes humanity different." From her pocket, she withdrew a small utility knife. Before the council's security could react, she drew the blade firmly across her palm. Gasps and clicks of alarm echoed throughout the chamber as blood welled from the wound. "In 6 days," she announced over the commotion, raising her bleeding hand high, "this will be completely healed. In 6 weeks, even the scar will begin to fade. Now tell me, honored representatives, if I had cut your natural armor, how long would it take to regrow?" The ensuing silence told her everything she needed to know. The Fosari representative's crystalline body vibrated, producing a sound like wind chimes. The human deliberately damaged itself to make a point. "Fascinating. And disturbing. Medical team to the council chamber," ordered Kazoth, his massive armored fist slamming the emergency communicator. Eliza shook her head. "That won't be necessary, Admiral." "You're bleeding," insisted a Mictari delegate, their shell-plated form shrinking back, as though her condition might be contagious. "For now," Eliza agreed calmly. She withdrew a small transparent packet from her jacket, a simple dermal sealant, and applied it to her wound. "But while we continue this discussion, my body is already at work. Blood is clotting. Platelets are gathering. Stem cells are mobilizing. By tomorrow, new tissue will be forming." The head of the Galactic Scientific Committee, a Jiraxian female with iridescent armor plates, moved closer. "This regenerative capacity, it is common to all humans. Standard issue," Eliza confirmed with a slight smile. "Some better than others, but yes." "Yet surely this makes you vulnerable," insisted Kazoth, gesturing at her sealed wound. "While you wait for this regeneration, you remain damaged, compromised." Eliza nodded, acknowledging his point. "Absolutely. We're vulnerable in ways you aren't. But we're also adaptable in ways you can't imagine. Throughout human history, we've survived catastrophic injuries that would have ended any armored species." She activated her tablet, projecting images around the chamber. Human climbers missing limbs, scaling mountains, athletes with prosthetics breaking records, scarred explorers continuing expeditions after injuries that should have been fatal. Our evolutionary strategy wasn't to prevent damage, but to continue functioning despite it. Eliza explained. You evolved armor to avoid injury entirely. We evolved systems to absorb injury and keep going anyway. She walked slowly around the chamber, making eye contact with each representative. The bleeding had already stopped, her hand steady as she gestured to the images. This diplomat survived an assassination attempt that put 3 bullets in his chest. 6 months later, he was back negotiating peace treaties. This explorer was trapped in ice for hours, her core temperature dropping to levels that should have been fatal. 2 weeks later, she continued her expedition. The council chamber had fallen completely silent, all attention focused on the small, soft-bodied human whose biological strategy challenged everything they understood about evolutionary success. We don't avoid damage, Eliza concluded. We incorporate it, learn from it, and continue. That is humanity's strength, not that we can't be hurt, but that we can be hurt repeatedly and still function, still adapt, still overcome. Kazoth studied her with new interest, his armored head tilting slightly. An intriguing approach to survival, Dr. Chen. But surely there must be limits to what even humans can endure. Eliza smiled. Admiral, finding those limits is practically our species' favorite pastime. Begin Trial 17, announced the emotionless voice over the testing chamber speakers. Commander Jackson Rivera's legs trembled as he stood upright, sweat darkening his already soaked testing suit. 16 grueling trials behind him, and the council observers remained unimpressed. Through the observation window, he could see their glittering armored forms conferring, making notes, occasionally pointing at him as though he were a particularly disappointing laboratory specimen. You may quit at any time, human, offered Dr. Shriva, the Fosari chief scientist, her crystalline form refracting the harsh light into dazzling patterns. No shame in acknowledging biological limitations. Jackson smiled through cracked lips. I'm good to continue, Doctor. The Galactic Council had insisted on these tests to determine humanity's worthiness for full membership. While other species were evaluated primarily on their technological achievements, humans faced unique scrutiny over their perceived biological deficiencies. Trial 17 began with a rush of scalding water that knocked Jackson off his feet. As he struggled to stand in the torrent, the temperature plummeted to near freezing in seconds. His muscles seized, but he forced himself upright, teeth chattering violently. Then came the winds, hurricane-force gales carrying stinging particles that abraded his exposed skin. On the observation deck, Admiral Kazoth leaned forward, the Jiraxian's armored brow plates shifting in what might have been concern. This trial killed 3 Mictari applicants, and they have redundant cardiopulmonary systems. The human should have collapsed 2 trials ago, agreed Vextar Ambassador Tekluk, mandibles clicking rapidly. Their pain responses indicate severe distress, yet performance metrics remain stable. Jackson fell to one knee as the chamber floor tilted sharply. Blood trickled from his nose, a microvessel rupture from the rapidly shifting pressure. He wiped it away, leaving a crimson streak across his face, and pushed himself back up. Enough, ordered Dr. Shriva suddenly, her crystalline voice vibrating with an unfamiliar tone. End Trial 17. The chamber conditions normalized instantly. Medical drones rushed in to assess Jackson's condition as the council representatives filed into the chamber, their various environmental suits and protective fields humming. Why did you continue? Demanded Admiral Kazoth, looming over the exhausted human. Your biometrics indicated critical stress thresholds were exceeded hours ago. Jackson's laugh turned into a ragged cough. Because you hadn't told me to stop, sir. Fascinating, the Vextar ambassador whispered, compound eyes fixed on Jackson's monitoring data. Their nervous system should have shut down from the pain alone. Jackson accepted a hydration pouch from a medical drone, gulping the electrolyte-rich fluid. Pain's just information, he managed between breaths. Useful information, but not a command. The testing chamber door slid open as a new figure entered. Another human, Dr. Ayana Tambala, Earth's medical liaison to the council. "That's quite enough for today," she announced firmly, moving to Jackson's side and checking his vitals manually, ignoring the advanced medical scanners. Her dark eyes flashed anger as she took in his condition. "You've exceeded the agreed protocols," she informed the council representatives, helping Jackson to his feet. "Human endurance doesn't mean we should be subject to unnecessary suffering." Kazov's armored head tilted. The subject did not request termination of the trial. "Because he's exactly the type of stubborn fool you'd expect to volunteer for this," Ayanna retorted. "Humans will endure far past what they should if they believe there's purpose in it. That's not an invitation to exploit us." As she helped Jackson toward the exit, Dr. Shriva stepped forward, crystalline fingers gesturing to the data displays. "Before you leave, Doctor, I must point out something remarkable in the commander's readings. During Trial 15, when gravity fluctuations reached 3G, his bone density actually increased by 2.3%. And during the radiation exposure in Trial 16, his cellular repair mechanisms accelerated rather than degraded." Ayanna paused. "Adaptive pressure response. Common in humans under extreme conditions. Not common anywhere else in the galaxy," replied Shriva. "In fact, it's unprecedented. Your species doesn't just tolerate environmental stressors, you adapt to them in real time." Jackson, despite his exhaustion, straightened slightly. "That's how we became the dominant species on our planet. Not because we were the strongest or had the best natural weapons. We were just relentlessly adaptable." As they exited, Kazov turned to the other council representatives. "I believe we may have been asking the wrong questions all along. Their lack of armor isn't a vulnerability. It's a prerequisite for their greatest strength." Later, reviewing the data in the station's primary laboratory, Dr. Shriva's facets flashed with unprecedented patterns as she addressed her colleagues. "We've been measuring the wrong variables," she announced, projecting holographic comparisons of human recovery rates against known species. "The most remarkable aspect isn't just their ability to withstand the trials, but what happens afterward." The display showed cellular imagery from samples taken during Jackson's recovery period. While the council members watched in fascination, human cells visibly rebuilt, reorganized, and strengthened in response to the damage they'd sustained. "Look at these muscle fibers." Shriva highlighted a section showing microscopic tears. In any other species, this would represent injury requiring weeks of healing. In humans, these microtears actually trigger hypertrophy. The muscles rebuild stronger than before. Deliberate damage as a pathway to improvement. The Micteri representative's voice conveyed disbelief. "That seems counterintuitive to evolutionary stability." "Yet it explains much about their history," countered Kazov, studying the data with newfound respect. "Their primitive training methods involve deliberately damaging tissues to strengthen them. Their medical procedures often require causing controlled harm to enable healing. Even their social structures embrace adversity as developmental." Ambassador Tukluk chittered softly, compound eyes reflecting the holographic displays. "Perhaps our focus on preventing all damage through armor has prevented similar adaptations in our own species." "That seems a high price to pay," objected a Fosuri diplomat, her crystalline form vibrating with discomfort. "Constant pain, constant repair. Is that not inefficient?" Shriva manipulated the display to show brain activity patterns. "That's the second revelation. Humans don't experience pain as we do. Their nervous systems include sophisticated filtering mechanisms that contextualize pain signals rather than treating them as absolute imperatives." "They can choose to ignore pain?" asked Kazov incredulously. "Not ignore, interpret," corrected Shriva. "They evaluate pain against purpose, weighing suffering against meaning. It's an evolutionary adaptation we've never encountered before, pain as information rather than command." The laboratory fell silent as the implications settled among the council representatives. Their species had evolved elaborate external protections to prevent damage at all costs. Humans had instead evolved sophisticated internal systems to contextualize, repair, and even benefit from damage. "They lack armor," Shriva concluded, because they've developed something potentially more valuable. Not invulnerability, but remarkable resilience. They absorb damage, process it, and rebuild. Even their psychological profiles show this pattern. They're built to last in an entirely different way than we are. Admiral Kizoth's armored digits tapped a rhythmic pattern on the console as he studied the data. His species had dominated several sectors through the natural advantage of their nearly impenetrable biological armor. Yet here was a fundamentally different path to survival, not through prevention of harm, but through response to it. If they can endure this as individuals, he mused aloud, what might they withstand as a species? The question hung in the air, both fascinating and faintly troubling. For species that evolved armor, threats were binary. Either they penetrated your defenses or they didn't. For humans, apparently, threats existed on a gradient of endurability. The implications for military strategy, diplomacy, and cooperation were profound and not entirely comfortable. I believe, Kizoth finally declared, that we have significantly underestimated humanity's potential contribution to the Galactic Council. Their uniqueness isn't a liability. It's precisely what makes them valuable. Sub-Commander Vraktor watched through his helmet display as the colony of New Horizon came into view. Dawn broke over the settlement, illuminating the primitive prefabricated structures humans called homes. His strike team of 40 elite Juraxian warriors would be more than sufficient for this task. Remember, he told his soldiers, humans are fragile. One solid blow should disable them. Make examples of the first resistors, and the rest will surrender. His intelligence briefing had been clear. Humans were soft-bodied curiosities that had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel despite their biological inadequacies. The Juraxian High Command had decided, 3 months after Earth's provisional acceptance into the Galactic Council, that humans were too unpredictable, too adaptable, and potentially too dangerous to allow further expansion. This police action would demonstrate human vulnerability and secure Juraxian dominance in this sector. Quick, efficient, and instructive. The first warning that things wouldn't go as planned came when their troop carrier exploded mid-descent. Impossible, snarled Vraktor as emergency pods jettisoned his soldiers toward the surface. Our scans showed no defense systems. On the ground, Captain Maya Okonkwo lowered her jury-rigged missile launcher, cobbled together from mining equipment, and reprogrammed terraforming explosives. Confirm hit on primary transport, she reported into her comm unit, her dark eyes never leaving the sky where emergency pods were now raining down. Prepare for ground engagement as discussed. Remember, people, we're not trying to penetrate their armor. We're making them work in it. The Juraxians landed hard but unharmed, their natural armor supplemented by battle suits designed to withstand atmospheric entry. They regrouped quickly, advancing on the settlement with disciplined precision. They found empty streets. Cowards, muttered Vraktor. They fled. But his tactical sensors registered life signs all around them. Inside structures, beneath the streets, scattered through the surrounding fields. The first attack came from everywhere at once. Not weapons fire, but blinding light as every reflective surface in the colony was suddenly angled to direct the rising sun's glare at the Juraxian helmet sensors. In the moment of confusion, makeshift caltrops, thousands of them, were scattered across the colony's pathways. They wouldn't penetrate Juraxian armor, but they didn't need to. They just needed to be cleared. Every step became laborious, exaggerated, energy-draining. Push forward. Vraktor commanded, sweeping his arm toward the colony center. His soldiers advanced in formation, their heavy footfalls crunching through the caltrops. 20 minutes later, they encountered their first actual resistance, a barricade of construction equipment and shipping containers blocking the main thoroughfare. Behind it stood a handful of humans armed with what appeared to be industrial tools rather than weapons. "Surrender now," Vraktor broadcasted, his translator converting his words to human standard. "Resistance is futile against Juraxian might." One human stepped forward. a dark-skinned male wearing what looked like a mining supervisor's uniform. "We're just colonists," he called. "We have no quarrel with the Juraxian hegemony." "Then lower your barricade and submit to authority," Vraktor replied, signaling his troops to prepare for the inevitable resistance. The human shrugged. "If you insist." He pressed a device in his hand. The barricade didn't lower. It exploded outward in a precisely calculated pattern, showering the Juraxian front line with debris. Not powerful enough to penetrate their armor, but more than enough to coat their helmet visors and sensor arrays with a clingy ablative foam that hardened on contact with air. "Can't hit what you can't see," Maya's voice crackled over the colony-wide announcement system. "Team 2, you're up." From rooftops and windows, colonists emerged with improvised water cannons, high-pressure mining equipment repurposed and filled with a viscous gel that further fouled Juraxian armor joints and cooling systems. Vraktor roared in frustration, blindly firing his plasma rifle toward where he'd last seen the humans. His shots went wide, impacting harmlessly against reinforced buildings. "Switch to infrared," he ordered his troops. "Find their heat signatures." But the colonists had anticipated this. Heating elements had been activated throughout the settlement, creating hundreds of human-shaped heat signatures. Meanwhile, the real colonists wore insulating gear salvaged from the colony's thermal regulation systems. By nightfall, the Juraxian force had advanced barely 200 meters into the settlement. 6 hours of constant harassment, never a direct confrontation, never a target substantial enough to engage properly, had left the soldiers exhausted. Their armor, designed for protection in direct combat, had become a liability in this strange attritional conflict. "They're testing our endurance," realized Vraktor as he scanned the colony layout. "They know they can't break our armor, so they're trying to exhaust us inside it." Inside his command post, a hastily fortified storage building, Vraktor assessed their situation. His soldiers' biometrics showed elevated stress levels. Their armor's power systems, designed for intense but brief engagements, were running at 60% efficiency. "This makes no tactical sense," insisted his second-in-command. "Why don't they evacuate? Why fight a battle they cannot win?" Vraktor had no answer. In Juraxian military doctrine, battles were decided by overwhelming force applied at critical points. This constant, distributed harassment defied conventional strategy. Outside, the night brought new challenges. The temperature dropped precipitously, a normal feature of this planet's climate, but one that forced the Juraxians to divert power to thermal regulation. Then came the sounds, low-frequency vibrations that resonated painfully through their armor without actually damaging it. None of the colonists slept that night. They worked in shifts, maintaining constant pressure on the invaders. Individuals would rest briefly, then return to their tasks, a rotating defense that never presented a substantial target, but never relented. By dawn, 3 of Vraktor's soldiers had collapsed from exhaustion, their biological systems unable to maintain the constant vigilance their situation demanded. The endless, trivial harassments had accomplished what direct assault could not. They had worn down the legendary endurance of Juraxian warriors. Dr. Eliza Chen stared in horror at the laboratory footage playing on her secure terminal. The Vextar test subject writhed in its restraints, mandibles clicking in a frenzied pattern that the translator rendered as a mixture of obscenities and pleas. Its exoskeleton had been partially dissolved and regenerated with human-derived genetic material, creating patches of soft, regenerative tissue among the natural armor. 14 days since modification, noted the clinical voice of the Vextar scientist. Subject displays enhanced recovery metrics, but increasing psychological instability. Pain responses remain unmanageable despite neural dampening. The footage abruptly ended. Eliza's hand shook as she accessed the next file. A Fosari subject whose crystalline structure had been interlaced with engineered human stem cells. The beautiful, faceted being's surface was cloudy, sick-looking, though the modified areas showed remarkable healing properties. "They're trying to steal what makes us human," she whispered, downloading the evidence. without understanding what it costs us. News of the Juraxian defeat at New Horizon had spread like wildfire through the Galactic Council. Various factions, both governmental and corporate, had launched secret research programs to understand and replicate human endurance capabilities. The goal: incorporate human-like stamina into their own species through genetic engineering without sacrificing their natural armor advantages. The results had been universally catastrophic. Research Facility 17, located on an asteroid in the neutral Proxima Belt, represented the cutting edge of xenobiological integration. Funded by a consortium of military interests from 7 council species, its mission was simple: harness human regenerative capabilities without sacrificing natural armor advantages. Dr. Nick Vash, lead geneticist for the Micteri Evolutionary Authority, surveyed her latest batch of hybrid tissue cultures with satisfaction. These samples, grown from modified Juraxian cell lines spliced with human DNA, showed unprecedented regeneration rates while maintaining structural integrity. Progress Report demanded the facility director, his armored form filling the doorway to her laboratory. Director Keldor represented the project's primary investors, species concerned about humanity's growing influence in council affairs. Breakthrough imminent, Nick Vash replied, mandibles twitching with excitement. We've isolated the genetic sequences responsible for human cell plasticity without compromising integrity factors. The application potential is extraordinary. Keldor leaned closer to examine the culture samples. Timeline to viable prototype: 3 months for preliminary trials, 6 for weaponized applications. The director's armored carapace clicked with satisfaction. Proceed with accelerated development. Our investors grow impatient. After he departed, Nick Vash returned to her work, manipulating the genetic sequences that would theoretically allow armored species to gain human-like regeneration without sacrificing protection. The implications were revolutionary. Soldiers whose armor could heal itself, workers who could endure hazardous environments indefinitely, a fundamental shift in the balance of power within the council. What she couldn't explain were the anomalies in the neural scans of test subjects. The modified tissues seemed to transmit pain signals differently, more intensely, more persistently. The subjects reported sensations they had no context for, no evolutionary framework to process. Acceptable side effects, she muttered, dismissing her concerns. They'll adapt. Meanwhile, through channels she preferred not to identify, Dr. Eliza Chen had compiled evidence of these illegal research programs. The data painted a disturbing picture: dozens of facilities across council space, thousands of test subjects, billions in funding, all pursuing the genetic secret to human endurance. Look at these neural patterns, she told her small team of trusted colleagues, projecting brain scans from test subjects across various species. The modified tissues are registering pain normally, but their brains can't process it correctly. The subjects are experiencing what we call chronic pain syndrome, but without the psychological architecture humans have evolved to manage it. Dr. James Watanabe, a xenoneurologist from the Mars Institute, nodded grimly. They want our regenerative capabilities without understanding that pain processing is integral to the system. It's like trying to install a combustion engine without an exhaust system. You'll get power, but you'll also get an explosion. We need to stop this, insisted Dr. Letitia Morrison, the team's biophysicist. These experiments violate at least 17 council directives on genetic modification. That's why we're compiling evidence for the ethics committee. Eliza agreed, but we need to understand what we're dealing with first. These research teams fundamentally misunderstand what makes humans resilient. She enlarged a scan showing neural pathways in a modified Vexstar subject. They think it's purely biological, just cells that repair faster. They don't grasp that our relationship with pain is completely different from theirs because our evolutionary history demanded it. Pain avoidance versus pain management, James summarized. Their species evolved to prevent damage through armor. We evolved to process damage and continue functioning. Exactly. Elisa said, highlighting comparative brain structures. Look at the human limbic system compared to equivalent structures in armored species. We have extensive neural networks dedicated to contextualizing pain, finding meaning in suffering, separating physical sensations from emotional responses. They have simple avoidance architectures. Pain equals damage equals retreat. Letitia frowned. So when they splice in human regenerative capabilities without these neural frameworks, they create monsters, Eliza finished grimly. Beings experiencing pain they can't process, healing from damage they can't contextualize. It's not just unethical, it's torture. The precursor artifact hung in space like a massive twisted cathedral, its impossible geometries shifting subtly even as you watched. Scientific instruments focused on it either malfunctioned or returned contradictory readings. 3 previous expeditions had failed to penetrate its outer defenses. Their ships returned with crews suffering strange ailments, calcified armor, crystalline growths, and irreparable damage to protective biological systems. It's killing them through their armor, observed Admiral Kazoth, studying the medical reports, turning their protections against them. The council chamber had grown silent as the implications became clear. This artifact could hold technological revelations beyond our understanding, said the Fossari Chancellor, her crystalline form gleaming under the chamber lights. But none of our species can withstand prolonged exposure. All eyes turned to the human delegation. The modified exploration vessel Persistence entered the artifact's gravitational field cautiously. Unlike previous council ships with their elaborate shielding systems, the Persistence relied on a fundamentally different approach. Dynamic adaptation, rather than static protection. Anomalous energy patterns detected, reported Dr. Hiroko Tanaka, the ship's chief science officer. Her fingers danced across holographic displays, recalibrating sensors in real time as the artifact's emissions shifted. The radiation signature is evolving. Commander Jackson Rivera nodded, studying the massive structure that dominated their view screen. The artifact's surface writhed with patterns that hurt the eyes if observed too directly. It's testing us, he observed, just like the previous expeditions, looking for vulnerabilities. Differences, added Lieutenant Maria Cruz from Engineering. We expect to be vulnerable. We're counting on it. Their mission had been controversial from the start. After 3 failed expeditions by armored species had resulted in casualties and no data, humanity had proposed a radical alternative, a primarily human crew with minimal shielding but maximum adaptability. The Council, desperate for information about the clearly artificial precursor artifact, had reluctantly agreed. Commencing first sampling protocol, Rivera announced. All stations, status reports. Around the bridge, his human crew responded with crisp efficiency, each monitoring systems designed to bend, rather than resist the artifact's unpredictable emissions. The few non-human specialists aboard were secluded in specially designed isolation chambers, where the artifact's influence would be minimized. Deploying collection drone, Tanaka confirmed, launching the first of many expendable probes. Unlike previous expedition drones with their elaborate defensive systems, these were simple, almost primitive devices, designed to gather data quickly before inevitably failing. Receiving telemetry, she reported moments later, eyes widening. Commander, these readings, they're clear, coherent. We're getting actual data. The bridge crew exchanged stunned glances. Previous expeditions had obtained only corrupted, contradictory information from the artifact. It's because we're not fighting it, Rivera realized. The previous expeditions tried to shield themselves completely, and the artifact responded by targeting those shields. We're letting it affect us in controlled ways, and adapting to it instead, finished Tanaka. It's the human approach to a T. For the next 72 hours, the Persistence maintained orbit around the artifact, collecting more usable data than all previous expeditions combined. The crew rotated through medical monitoring constantly, each person's exposure to the artifact's emissions carefully tracked and managed. They discovered quickly that the artifact's effects were cumulative, and that different humans showed varying tolerance levels. Some developed mild symptoms after just hours of exposure: headaches, visual distortions, microtremors in fine motor control. Others could endure days before showing similar effects. It's like radiation exposure, Dr. Alexander Volkov, the ship's chief medical officer, explained during the daily briefing. But more complex, the artifact's emissions seem to target regulatory systems, the biological equivalent of control mechanisms. In armored species, this manifests as crystallization or calcification of protective structures. And in humans, Rivera asked. Neurological effects primarily. Our central nervous system attempts to adapt but eventually becomes overwhelmed. The good news is that unlike the armor effects, these symptoms appear reversible with sufficient distance from the artifact and time to recover. The mission continued, with crew members rotating through exposure and recovery phases. They established a pattern: approach, collect data until human limitations were reached, retreat to safe distance, analyze findings while recovering, then approach again with adjusted protocols based on new understanding. Rivera found himself in the observation lounge during one recovery phase, staring at the artifact through specially filtered viewports. Its twisted geometries seemed almost comprehensible now, after repeated exposure, as if his brain was slowly learning to process what his eyes were seeing. "Beautiful, isn't it?" came a voice beside him. Teklar, the Vextar xenorchaeologist, had emerged from his isolation chamber, his chitinous exoskeleton encased in a protective field that hummed softly. "In a terrifying way," Rivera agreed. "Your approach is working," Teklar acknowledged, compound eyes reflecting the artifact's shifting patterns. "Though I confess I don't understand why the artifact affects your species less severely than mine." Rivera considered this. "I don't think it affects us less. It affects us differently. Your armor becomes a liability because the artifact targets systems that don't change. We have fewer fixed systems to target. We're constantly changing, adapting, compensating." The Galactic Advancement Awards ceremony was broadcast across 47 systems, watched by countless billions. On the gleaming stage in the Council's Grand Hall, Captain Maya Okonkwo accepted the Order of Distinguished Service, the highest honor the Council could bestow upon non-founding species representatives. For extraordinary leadership during the Juraxian conflict, and for establishing humanity as a pillar of endurance within our galactic community, intoned the Miktari Arbiter, placing the crystalline medallion around her neck. Maya smiled for the cameras, said all the right words, and left the stage to thunderous applause. A hero of humanity, an exemplar of the trait that had made their species famous throughout known space. 12 hours later, Dr. Eliza Chen found her crumpled in a utility corridor outside the habitat areas, sobbing uncontrollably. "I can't sleep," Maya whispered as Eliza helped her to the medical center. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, watching my people die, making decisions that sent them to their deaths." The neural scan revealed what Eliza had suspected. Maya's brain showed classic patterns of post-traumatic stress disorder, with heightened activity in the amygdala and reduced function in areas responsible for emotional regulation. "You need specialized treatment," Eliza told her gently. "Not medals." "Can't," Maya responded, her voice hollow. "I'm humanity's poster child now, the woman who outlasted the Juraxians. If they see me broken," her voice trailed off. Eliza's heart sank. Maya wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. As humanity integrated further into galactic society, a disturbing pattern had emerged. Human representatives pushing themselves beyond reasonable limits, suppressing normal trauma responses, refusing psychological support, because humans are supposed to endure. The Council species, with their focus on prevention rather than recovery, simply didn't understand the psychological component of human resilience. They saw the physical endurance without grasping its costs. "We're creating a mental health crisis," Dr. Sanjay Gupta explained during an emergency meeting of the Human Health Oversight Committee. As chief psychologist for the Human Integration Office, he had been tracking the alarming trends. Holographic charts displayed the data. Rates of severe psychological distress among humans in Council service had increased 340% in the past 3 years, since humanity had become known as the species that endures. Commander Rivera's expedition team members are showing delayed traumatic responses despite their success. He continued. 3 veterans from the New Horizon Defense Force attempted suicide last month, and Captain Okonkwo's condition is deteriorating despite intensive therapy. The small group of human doctors and specialists exchanged grim looks. Our people are destroying themselves trying to live up to our galactic reputation, said Dr. Letitia Morrison, tapping a datapad with the latest mental health statistics. They push beyond reasonable limits, suppress normal trauma responses, and refuse support because they feel they need to uphold humanity's image. We've become victims of our own success story, agreed Dr. Eliza Chen. The Council species see our physical endurance, but miss the crucial psychological component. They don't understand that our ability to keep functioning through trauma isn't the same as being unaffected by it. Dr. Aisha Mbeki, Earth's representative to the Council's Health Committee, studied the data with growing concern. The irony is that psychological processing is the very foundation of human resilience. By suppressing it to appear more resilient, our people are undermining the very system that makes endurance possible. We need to reframe the narrative, Letitia insisted. Make the Council understand that human resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and rebuilding, repeatedly. That won't be easy, Aisha cautioned. The Council species evolved to prevent damage entirely. The concept of beneficial breakdown and reconstruction is foreign to their evolutionary experience. Eliza straightened in her chair, decision made. Then we need to make them understand, not just for our sake, but for theirs. We can't let human endurance become a pathology. 3 weeks later, Dr. Aisha Mbeki stood before an emergency session of the full Galactic Council. The chamber was packed with representatives from all member species, drawn by the cryptically announced topic, critical human biological disclosure. Aisha's calm demeanor belied her inner tension as she surveyed the assembled delegates. These beings, with their natural armor and protective adaptations, had evolved to prevent damage. How could she make them understand a species that evolved to process damage instead? Distinguished representatives, she began, her voice steady. I come before you today to discuss what we are calling the endurance crisis. Since joining the galactic community, humanity has earned a reputation for exceptional resilience. Yes, we can endure physical hardship at levels that would incapacitate many of your species, but there is a critical aspect of this ability that we have failed to communicate effectively. She brought up comparative neural scans on the massive display screens. Human brains alongside those of various Council species. Your evolutionary strategy focused on preventing damage through physical protection, she explained, highlighting the relevant brain structures. Humans evolved differently. We developed complex neurological and psychological systems designed not to prevent damage, but to process it, contextualize it, and recover from it. The scans shifted to show functional differences under stress conditions. When faced with trauma, your species typically respond with immediate retreat and protected recovery. Humans engage in what we call psychological integration, a process where traumatic experiences are processed, contextualized, and incorporated into our identity. She paused, letting the implications sink in. This integration process is not optional for us. It's fundamental to how our brains function. When humans suppress this process, trying to endure without processing, the results are catastrophic. New images appeared, brain scans of human operatives suffering from severe psychological distress, their neural patterns showing distinct abnormalities. These are the brains of humans who have been celebrated throughout Council space for their exceptional endurance. Captain Okonkwo, who led the defense of New Horizon. Commander Rivera, who led the precursor artifact mission. Lieutenant Chung, who rescued 17 delegates during the embassy crisis. Murmurs spread through the chamber as the delegates recognized the names of humans who had become almost legendary for their resilience. All of these individuals are now suffering severe psychological distress, not despite their endurance, but because of how that endurance has been misunderstood and misapplied. Admiral Kazoth leaned forward, his massive armored form shifting. "Are you suggesting humans are not as resilient as we believed?" "I'm suggesting," Aisha replied carefully, "that we are resilient in a way you've never had to understand. We don't simply endure trauma. We must process it, reshape ourselves around it, transform because of it. When we deny ourselves this process, trying to live up to an oversimplified ideal of human endurance." She displayed the statistics on psychological breakdown rates among humans in council space. "We break in ways your armor never could." The council chamber fell silent as the implications registered. For species evolved to prevent damage, the concept of necessary damage processing was profoundly foreign. "You're saying," the Fosari Chancellor finally ventured, her crystalline form catching the light, "that humans require periods of vulnerability to maintain strength." "Exactly," Aisha nodded. "Our endurance isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and rebuilding, repeatedly. The recovery and integration process is as essential to our resilience as the initial capacity to withstand stress." She highlighted brain regions involved in memory processing and emotional regulation. "When we experience trauma, these systems work to process that experience, giving it context and meaning. This isn't a weakness or a flaw. It's the foundation of human resilience. Without it, our capacity for physical endurance becomes self-destructive." The Mictari delegates' shell plates shifted nervously. "If what you're saying is true, we've been unconsciously harming our human colleagues by celebrating their endurance without understanding its nature." "Precisely," Aisha confirmed. "By expecting humans to simply endure without acknowledging the necessary processing afterward, you've been asking us to suppress the very mechanisms that make our endurance possible." Admiral Kazoth's armored head tilted thoughtfully. "This explains much about human behavior that has puzzled us. Your rituals of remembrance, your emphasis on storytelling after hardship, your insistence on talking through experiences. All part of our integration process," Aisha agreed. "These aren't luxuries or cultural quirks. They're essential biological functions for our species." The council deliberated for days, reviewing the evidence and consulting with both human and alien medical experts. The resulting resolution was unprecedented, a formal recognition of integrative recovery as an essential medical need for humans, with mandatory recovery protocols for all human operatives in council service. Known as the human doctrine, don't try to out-armor the enemy, outlast them, outthink them, and be willing to endure more hardship than they are. The turning point came at the Battle of Ta Siti, where human forces allowed Fosari troops to overextend their supply lines before launching a months-long campaign of small, continuous engagements that slowly wore down the invaders without ever presenting a decisive target. "The humans taught us that victory isn't always about winning each battle," Admiral Kazoth later wrote. "Sometimes it's about being the last one standing when the dust settles. History will mark this as the turning point," declared the Mictari High Speaker, her layered shell gleaming under the council chamber's lights. The massive hall, packed with representatives from 42 spacefaring civilizations, hummed with anticipation. Dr. Eliza Chen, seated in the human delegation section, found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. 20 years since humanity's first contact with the Galactic Council, 20 years of misunderstandings, conflicts, and ultimately, profound mutual growth. On the central platform, a unique gathering was taking place. Admiral Kazoth, his once intimidating armor now modified with sections of adaptive mesh, developed through human-Jiraxian collaboration, stood alongside Maya Okonkwo, recently appointed Human High Commissioner. Most remarkably, a crystalline structure pulsed nearby. A representative of the convergence, the hybrid species born from Fosari engineering and human genetics, once an existential threat, now a conditionally accepted associate of the Council. The xenobiological classification system that has guided Council policy for millennia requires fundamental revision, Kizoth announced. Our traditional evaluation metrics prioritized protective adaptations above all else: exoskeletons, carapaces, force projection organs. These were considered the markers of evolutionary success. The Admiral gestured to the human delegation. The integration of humanity into our galactic community has challenged these assumptions at every level. Their evolutionary path prioritized resilience over protection, adaptation over prevention, recovery over avoidance. Holographic displays throughout the chamber illustrated the revised classification system, where protective capabilities had once been the primary axis of evaluation. Now adaptive capacity and recovery mechanisms were given equal weight. We propose that endurance, the ability to sustain function through adversity rather than simply preventing adversity, be recognized as an evolutionary strategy of equal sophistication to armored protection. Kizoth continued. The vote that followed was nearly unanimous. 20 years after being initially dismissed as fragile curiosities, humans had transformed how the galaxy understood biological success. After the ceremony, Eliza found herself in one of the chamber's quiet alcoves, joined unexpectedly by Stalin, the Fossari diplomat whose warnings about the convergence had helped avert a greater catastrophe. Your species has changed us all, the crystalline being observed, facets glimmering with subtle patterns that Eliza had learned to recognize as thoughtfulness, not through dominance, but through difference. Eliza smiled. That's the human way. We've never been the strongest or most naturally protected species on our planet. We survived, thrived, even, by adapting, by finding alternative approaches. The convergence studies your psychological patterns with great interest, Stalin noted. They find human trauma processing particularly fascinating. The concept of growth through damage rather than despite it remains challenging for them. They'll get there, Eliza replied. They have the framework now. Understanding will come with experience. Across the chamber, she spotted Maya deep in conversation with a group of young officers from various species, the first graduating class of the Interspecies Command Academy. The program, Maya's initiative, trained military leaders in both armored and adaptive tactical approaches. The next generation will have advantages we never did, Eliza observed. They won't have to choose between protection and adaptation. They'll understand both evolutionary strategies.